Good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the Roundtable workshop, Advancing Biodiversity Law and Fair Governance Through Agroecology, hosted by the Agroecology Coalition and IPES-Food. I now hand the floor over to the chair, Oliveros, coordinator of Agroecology Coalition.
Thanks very much, Alicia. Well, we are delighted to welcome you today and to be part of this online conversation at the Biodiversity Law and Governance Day. Well, again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We're sitting in Cali, Colombia now, and as many of the other speakers during the COP16 of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Well, not all of you may be familiar with agroecology. Agroecology is an environmentally and socially sustainable approach to food and farming that prioritizes diversity and working with nature, not against it. It is people and nature friendly. It benefits nature, animals, water systems, and trees, as well as people. It is a scientific discipline, a set of practices, and a social movement. As a science, it studies how different components of the agroecosystem interact. As a set of practices, it seeks sustainable farming systems that optimize and stabilize yields. And as a social movement, it pursues multifunctional roles for agriculture, promoting social justice, nurtures identity and culture, and strengthens the economic viability of rural families. Family farmers are people who hold the tools for practicing agroecology. They are real keepers, together with indigenous peoples, of the knowledge and wisdom needed for this agenda. Therefore, it is really important that we become fully aware of what agroecology is all about, and also link the conversation around agroecology in the issue of governance and environment as well in general. As you can see, agroecology is really anchored on a set of principles and elements. Principles which were developed by the high-level panel of experts of the Committee on World Food Security, housed at FAO. It is fully aligned with the 10 elements of agroecology, which was adopted by 197 member states of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. One of those principles of agroecology is really around land and resource governance, or around responsible governance. It is about strengthening institutional arrangements to improve, including recognition and support of family farmers, smallholders, peasant and food producers as sustainable managers of natural and genetic resources. It is really about sustainable food and agriculture requiring accountable and effective governance mechanisms at different levels. So this event is really timely as we really see the centrality of governance and law in the pursuit of a truly agroecological and sustainable food systems. Now, we are delighted to have with us here in the panel today several speakers who will be sharing with us their knowledge and their insights into the topic around agroecology. I hope that they're all now online to join us in our conversation. And yeah, first of all, we have Mrs. Lim Lee Ching, who is the co-chair of IPES-Food and senior researcher at the Third World Network. Thanks very much for joining us. We also have with us today Ysabel Calderón, who is the founder and CEO of Sumak Kawsa and a member of the Young Professionals for Agriculture and Development, Peru chapter. We also have with us today, okay, I'm trying to see all the, who else has joined us? Mrs. Marta Ngalowera. I don't know, Marta, if you are with us now. If not, she will join us soon, who is the National Coordinator of NBSAP at the Office of the Vice President of the Government of Tanzania. We will also be joined later today by Mr. Michael Taylor, who is the Executive Director of the International Land Coalition. He may have some challenge connecting online. We also have with us the national representative of the Land for Life Ethiopia, Dr. Bayush. And then we will be having with us as well Mr. Fikru Takele, the National Coordinator of Land for Life, Ethiopia. And after the panel discussion, we will have some discussants and some people who will be sharing their insights and perspective based on what they have heard. So we'll have brief interventions from Mr. Kwame Kuponze of Togo, from Janet Nyependi of Uganda, but also from Krista Sutta from Race Consortium. But before we dig into the conversation today, we would like to project a 3-minute video from Olivier de Schutter, who is the co-chair with Ching of the IPES-Food, but who is also the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. So the technical team can project the video, please.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Olivier de Schutter. I'm the co-chair of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, IPES-Food, and the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. I'm actually speaking today from New York, from the United Nations headquarters in New York. It is a great pleasure for me to congratulate the organizers of this event, Advancing Biodiversity Law and Fair Governance through Agroecology, that contributes to the 16th Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity today in Cali in Colombia. It is, to me, particularly important to emphasize the contribution that biodiversity can make to improving the situation of people in poverty. Biodiversity is supportive of the livelihoods of people in poverty, first directly. A large number of people across the world, including almost 400 million indigenous people, depend on biodiversity for their livelihoods. They depend on the forests and on plants for food needs, for medicinal plants to heal themselves, and they depend on the forests for fuel wood in order to produce energy. So biodiversity directly contributes to improving the livelihoods of people in poverty, and biodiversity also contributes indirectly to improving the situation of people in poverty, because biodiversity allows to purify water, it allows to ensure that healthy soils can function as carbon sinks by stocking carbon and thus mitigating climate change. And as we know, people in poverty are most affected by water scarcity as well as by the climate change related events, floods and droughts that result from us not doing enough to mitigate climate change. So for all these reasons, biodiversity is closely connected to the global fight against poverty. And in that context, against this background, agroecology has a major function to fulfill. Agroecology, of course, serves to maintain and enhance healthy ecosystems, and that is why a growing number of organizations and experts see it as the only way forward for food production and agriculture. But agroecology is also a way to maintain food security and support decent livelihoods. Agroecology allows to maintain healthy soils, to maintain diverse, nutritious diets. It's a way to ensure that food production can be less costly, more affordable for small farmers, reducing the cost of food production by reducing the need to use external inputs, chemical fertilizers, pesticides, and de-linking food production from the highly volatile price of fossil energies. And finally, agroecology contributes to resilient food systems that are better equipped to deal with the shocks from climate change. So for all these reasons, agroecology has much to contribute to biodiversity. Policymakers should seek inspiration from the very many positive examples we have of agroecology providing solutions to the challenges that we face. And I would like to again thank the Agroecology Coalition as well as the FAO, its partner in an event such as today, for promoting agroecology and enlightening policymakers as to the services it can provide. Many thanks indeed, and I look forward to our continued collaboration on this important topic.
And let me see if we have all our speakers in here. I wanted to first ask the question to our representatives from different countries. Martha, are you with us? All right. Anyways, so let's start before Martha. Okay, Martha, are you with us? Can you hear us? Martha Ngalowera is at the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment under the Office of the Vice President of the Government of Tanzania. Martha, can you hear us? Fantastic. Can you unmute yourself? I'll ask the first question to you. Now, Tanzania has recently launched its national ecologically organic strategy. I just wanted to ask you, Marta, how does your country integrate agroecology in the NBSAP, the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan? And what governance mechanism is in place to be able to ensure the implementation of your NBSAP?
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It's true that the government has launched the agroecology strategy. And when we are developing this NBSAP, we managed to integrate the agroecology into 14 NBSAP targets. And during the development of those targets, we cooperate with various stakeholders, especially from the local communities, NGOs, local NGOs, and women, because we knew that women are the very best community who are practicing agroecology locally at their home. Therefore, we say that, okay, let us put as many as initiatives in these NBSAP targets so that we may have a lot of activities for various community to implement agroecology system in Tanzania. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Marta. I wanted to know as well whether, how are you putting up a mechanism to implement and roll out your NBSAP, but also the national agroecology strategy of Tanzania. Could you talk to us a little bit about this implementation task force and how is it being organized?
Yeah, because the NBSAP is going to be implemented in various sectors and various institutions. Therefore, we have the challenge of using the local seeds and local products in Tanzania. And then we have the challenge of using a lot of chemicals and agricultural chemical inputs during the farming. And those are tending to lose the nature of our food. Although we have a lot of food, but it's not interested to most of the community in Tanzania. Therefore, we are expecting that through the government or through the vice president, who is the spearheading on environmental issues, when we are going to talk about agroecology, every community will be excited and will be practicing. So that is the mechanism which we are going to use to promote the agroecology as a means of conserving biodiversity, as well as a means of changing our food system production in Tanzania. Hello? Hello?
Yes, Martha, can you follow up with the question asked by Oliver, please? Ah, sorry, Lynn.
Come again, come again. Did you hear, no? Didn't you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well. Thanks a lot, Martha. Now let's turn to Ching, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I think when we think about agriculture and biodiversity, we of course have to bear in mind that 50% of the world's arable land is devoted to agriculture. And so it means that the protection, conservation, and restoration of agricultural biodiversity really offers one of the most promising avenues to achieve the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We know from IPES, for example, that industrial agriculture and land use change associated with it is one of the key drivers of biodiversity loss. We've lost vibrant biodiverse systems that have been replaced by large-scale monocultures and intensive use of chemical inputs. And these uniform farming systems are undermining agricultural biodiversity, as well as the diversity of our diets. More importantly, they're actually leaving food systems very vulnerable to diseases and climate shocks, and having the social impacts of forcing farmers and communities off their land. Now, as Oliver had pointed out, the agroecology, as defined by FAO's 10 key elements and elaborated by the 13 principles, actually centers both biodiversity and responsible governance. Agroecology is actually already fully compatible with the goals of the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Many of us are in Cali for the Conference of the Party happening right now. And the CBD's elements, agroecology, because it's senses participation, biodiversity protection, equity, social justice, actually provides a framework to guide policy and regulatory actions and reform in an agroecological direction. Now, of course, as mentioned, countries will have to implement their national biodiversity strategies and action plans at the national level. And the 13 agroecology principles can actually help existing efforts to be more specific. For example, targeting regulation of genetically modified organisms or the reduction of the risks of excess fertilizer use and chemical pesticides, for example. Also encouraging the redirection of agricultural subsidies away from industrial agriculture and towards agroecological farming. And importantly, the principles around securing social equity. They center justice, participation, gender equality, fair governance, and the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, including peasants and other small-scale food producers. Now, these elements are all expressed in various targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. For example, Target 7, Target 10 on sustainable agriculture, Target 17 addressing biosafety issues and living modified organisms, 18, 22, 23, which talk about participation and gender equality. Moreover, in the Global Biodiversity Framework, its Section C makes it very clear that this biodiversity framework should be implemented following a human rights-based approach, as well as depending on ensuring gender equality and empowerment of women and girls and on reducing inequalities. So we think that incorporating these elements, which are both expressed in the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and are congruent with the principles and elements of agroecology, will be a central goal and should be a central goal of every government's NBSAP or National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn, for that one. In fact, it was not until 2 years ago that we could explicitly find the word agroecology in the text of the Global Biodiversity Framework under Target 10. And that is, to a certain extent, a big achievement already of the agroecology movement. But more needs to be done to really make sure that it permeates deeply into the CBD's Kunming-Montreal GBF, but more importantly in the NBSAP, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right, in terms of country implementation. Now, I turn over the floor to you, Mike, who has just joined us, and I see you're there at the ILC's booth at CBD. The question that I wanted to ask you similar to that of Lynn, is really how can the current food systems governance be best designed to take into account biodiversity and vice versa, and what you see as important features of a mechanism that is inclusive and representative enough to ensure equity and enhance biodiversity law. I know that this is into the core of what you do at ILC, so it would be wonderful to share with us your thinking on this.
Thank you so much, Oliver. It's really a pleasure to take part in this. I apologize for the background noise. I'm joining you from the middle of the COP here, and there's so much going on around us, even though it's Saturday. But it's a real privilege to be together with you. Agroecology is very, very important to many members of ILC. Our network is quite wide and quite diverse. But many smallholder farmer members, but not only, many women's organizations, youth organizations, indigenous peoples organizations often refer to agroecology as their primary activity on the land that they're trying to secure. So let me answer your question just by sort of sharing some perspectives from our coalition, and really the links between why our members seek to secure land rights and the principles of agroecology, and how the two are really entwined for, as you said, not only more equitable food systems, but equitable livelihoods and even equitable participation in decision making at the local level. You know, sometimes it's simply about democracy, about the possibility of local people to produce good, healthy, sustainable food, but also to make decisions about their own future and to make decisions about their lands and their natural resources. So 3 points, if I may. The first is that agroecology is all about having a long-term perspective. You don't develop agroecology production systems overnight. You do it really working with a long term of developing a system which is resilient and which is diverse, and that needs secure land tenure. It's very difficult for families that don't have the security that the land that they use will still be under their control next year, to really invest in that. And so we'd say, you know, from that point of view, secure land tenure is a prerequisite for agroecological production and sustainable practices. And I must emphasize here, particularly women. Many of our members talk about the challenges in their context of securing land rights in the name of women producers. Secondly, and more with the climate crisis, agroecology production is in the context of quite frequent crises, both particularly environmental, but sometimes often economic shocks as well. And the ability of smallholder farmers to get through these shocks is much stronger if they own the land. And can come back and rebuild on their own land. Otherwise, the risk that they lose access to that land is so much higher. And then thirdly, and this comes more to the center of the question that you're asking, Oliver, is that agroecology seeks to promote social equity. It's all about social justice. It's about empowering farmers to produce in a sustainable way, and about food sovereignty, about farmers being able to decide what kind of foods they want to be feeding their families and their countries with. And secure land tenure helps give that control that allows those kind of decisions to be made, and that approach to be used. The bottom line is, without land, there's no agroecology. No land, no agroecology. And I think that's the message from our coalition to the Agroecology Coalition, and the many people that are part of this great event that you're organizing today. We come from the land angle, but many of our members, securing land rights is a way to be able to produce good, healthy, sustainable foods to stewards, with the message that we're giving here at the CBD, is really on the key role that smallholder farmers using agroecological production systems play in stewarding biodiversity and in actually enhancing biodiversity. Unfortunately, this is not a message that we are hearing very much enough. We're not hearing it enough at the CBD, and that's one reason why this is such an important seminar that you're putting on, and with much thanks and much appreciation from the ILC membership for doing that. So back to you, Oliver. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike. In fact, I am from the Philippines, but we also say land is life.
Yes.
And that is where everything is the same thing, that water is life. And it's quite fitting because our next speaker that I wanted to ask is coming from an organization called Land for Life Ethiopia. So I wanted to pass on the floor to you, Dr. Bayush. I just wanted to ask you the same question from where you are sitting and from your context in Ethiopia. What do you think, how do you think our current food system is best designed to better take into account biodiversity and vice versa? And how, you know, how governance mechanisms can be designed to make it more inclusive and equitable. Over to you, Dr. Bayush. Can you hear us? All right, as we wait for our colleagues from Ethiopia to respond, I hand over the floor to, well, the same question to our youth representative. I mean, the youth are the architects of tomorrow. And how are you seeing things from where you are sitting as the next generation leader in pushing for sustainable food systems? How do you think a better governance be designed for more inclusive system, particularly, you know, taking into account young people into the fore? Lisa? Lisa, can you, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Okay. Is the other question the room to rate?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you in terms of, you know, how do you think the current food system governance be best designed to better take into account biodiversity, but also how a governance system should look like to make it more inclusive and welcoming of young people who we think should be engaged and involved in the key decisions and conversations, particularly with regard to the future of food and biodiversity conservation and sustainable use.
To better integrate biodiversity into food systems governance policies should support agroecological practices that naturally enhance biodiversity, such as polycultures, agroforestry, and regenerative soil management. This requires cross-sector coordination that aligns agricultural policy with environmental goals, ensuring that food production methods protect and restore ecosystems. Incentives like subsidies for biodiversity and friendly practices and training for farmers in sustainable techniques will enable food systems to be more resilient while actively supporting biodiversity. Embedding biodiversity metrics within agricultural policy also ensures that ecosystems health is a core objective alongside food security. Inclusive governance requires direct participation from smallholder farmers, indigenous communities, young people too is really important, and marginalized groups who often have the deepest local knowledge about biodiversity. Establishing multi-stakeholder councils where these groups have decision-making roles ensures governance that reflects diverse perspectives and respect cultural practices. Integrating traditional ecological knowledge into policy enrich biodiversity laws with sustainable practices rooted in local expertise. In our case, like WIPAR, you know, in Peru chapter, we promote this connection with young rural, with professional young, to establish different solutions, to promote an inclusive solutions in different communities, rural communities, peasant communities, indigenous communities. And so women and young people is really important, to do it possible these goals and achieve this. Yeah, I think that's all.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Isa. I want to. Yes, I think Dr. Sorry for the background noise. Turn the floor to Dr. Bayos from Land for Life in Ethiopia. The same question: how do you think, from where you're sitting in your country, how do you think inclusive and
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we could hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, the same question. I wanted to ask, how do you think a governance system can be made more inclusive and representative, particularly in terms of making sure that we are promoting a sustainable food systems? What is your experience in Ethiopia?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear me? Please
Yes,
go
I
ahead.
can hear you. Okay.
Yes.
I was muted. I couldn't open it earlier. Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay. From the Ethiopian perspective, we are promoting agroecology, and actually it's a recent phenomenon, I may say, but the concept is not fully understood by many of the practitioners. There are agroecological practices here and there, elements of being practiced by some organizations and all that. So we want to bring those together and share information and all that. Looking into the production system and the biodiversity, there is interest to promote diversity because the small-scale farmers are diversity-based farmers, but land fragmentation is now becoming a greater challenge. Another one is land tenure security. So in our case, land belongs to the government and the people have use rights. So in a way that is hindering some long-term investment to improve land productivity. The other challenge is we didn't have a land use policy, but related to this, the biodiversity framework. It's the Ethiopian Biodiversity Institute who is leading that component. There is a national biodiversity platform that includes people from the Biodiversity Institute, university, civil society organizations, individual professionals, and all that. So it's a kind of government NGO partnership. And there is operational guide developed. There also it focuses on including indigenous knowledge, which is really very practical and diversity-based to studies those and also include as part of the biodiversity conservation elements. And regarding how to improve the governance, it's also good to include women and especially the youth in policy formulation and in different dialogues and discussions. And also we focus on food sovereignty because controlling the production resources, land is very critical because we are agricultural based community and land is a very crucial resource. So awareness creation on agroecology is an activity which we are doing jointly with like-minded organizations. And also there are some initiatives that are promoting diversity, like the reforestation programs, strengthening farmer managed systems, soil and water conservation and land rehabilitation works, and also promoting on-farm diversity through seed exchange and food fairs, and also supporting youth initiatives who are engaging in agroecological business activities. These are some of the initiatives in our context. Diversity is very critical. As a diversity center also, we give attention to the conservation and utilization of the natural resource base. So aligning also any policies in relation to basically like the CBD and biodiversity law. These are also very crucial because most of the development initiatives are focusing on certain varieties, which is limiting the choices. And that also constrains the capacity of communities for resilience to different shocks that may happen in due course. So aligning with international and policies is also important. So seeing food also as a fundamental human right, that's also an approach which needs to be given attention, and we so as civil society organizations are also advocating for that. Regarding land rights of women, we have carried out land registration initiatives, and then both the man and women are registered as owners, and they're both of on the certificates, both photographs of the husband and wife is there. So that has also empowered women. Some years back, before the registration, it's only the household head who is registered as having the legal right to use the land. So in case of disputes, the women are not allowed to get land access. But through the registrations, now women have equal rights. So they can also, in cases of divorce, they have the right to get shares. Although it may have some challenges upon implementation, but this registration has been carried out in the many regions. So it has contributed a lot to empower women. Thank you.
Thanks very much. We could see here the central role of women actually in making sure that food systems are sustainable and mechanisms are as representative and vivid as possible. Particularly, I mean, I know in your part of the world, in Africa, with 70, if not 80% of agricultural workers are women, and yet less than 10% have are represented in leadership positions in agriculture. So we could see the imbalance there in terms of who are really providing the work and who are making decisions insofar as agriculture and food is concerned. Let me turn over again to Lynn and to Mike. From your work respectively at PWN, but also at ILC, can you share with us some examples of an inclusive mechanism that is put in place on the ground?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Oliver. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think the previous speakers have highlighted obviously the importance of the interface between rights and governance, and I think it's absolutely critical that we need to develop participation modalities that are underpinned by human rights, and this actually requires the reduction of large-scale commercial actors in decision-making spaces, because we know that there are conflicts of interest in that regard, while also increasing the participation of peasants and other small-scale food producers, indigenous peoples, local communities, women, civil society, and youth. I think there are, there are many different examples around the world that we can highlight, and the previous speaker has already alluded to some of that. I just wanted to bring two examples. For example, in Porto Alegre, there have been very effective participatory budgeting for food system decisions, which uses grassroots organizing, outreach, neighborly word of mouth to get those who usually don't can't participate into the process to look at food systems and where finances are allocated and what should be prioritized. Now, and this also doesn't restrict participation based on citizenship. So immigrants and undocumented peoples can also take part. So a very effective participatory method. There are also many examples of emerging democratic governance spaces. I think, we've talked a lot about the need to democratize food governance and to have food democracies. And we know, for example, that in parts of the developed world, including in the US, there are examples of food policy councils, which bring together a diversity of food systems, duty bearers, right bearers, and other stakeholders and rights holders to examine food systems for their specific region, develop recommendations, and coordinate activities. So these are very local grassroots organizing initiatives that actually put power and voice back in people's hands. And importantly, of course, when we take a human rights lens to this, we of course have to really privilege and advocate for the rights of the peoples who are on the ground producing the food, who are the ones who are stewarding biodiversity. And so, of course, we bring us back to, again, what's happening here in COP. When we look at the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the targets in Target 22 and 23 talk about the rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, which include peasants and small-scale food producers, women and youth, including, of course, the right to land tenure and equal access to land. So I think these are important elements that we need to weave and bring together when we talk about food system governance from an agroecological perspective. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn. Really, the citizen participation is key. I mean, we need to push governments and assume our role as citizens, right, to make sure that things are working in our favor and not, giving politicians favor. Mike, some examples that we have seen on the vast areas of work.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to give you an example, and I purposely choose one from a dry land area, pastoralism, relating to pastoralists, because I think pastoral production systems, and I'm talking here about livestock keepers, often livestock keepers that move, that are nomadic because they're following where the rains fall. And so their dry lands, dry season grazing may be different from their wet season grazing. I'm talking about Tanzania here in this example, is a very important food production system in many parts of the world with relatively low rainfall. It's also, pastoralism is a very important ecosystem management system. For managing these ecosystems. Now, unfortunately, in many rangelands around the world, let's say West Africa, the Horn of Africa, what one thinks of when one thinks of food production systems is conflict between agriculturalists and conflict with pastoralists. And so we worked with the government of Tanzania in Dodoma region, and a whole group of pastoralist organizations to start, and their neighbors who are not pastoralists, who use the same area at different times of the year, to work out what you called a participatory land use management plan. And this looked at the grazing resources, the water resources, the grass, the grazing resources, and through a process of about a year, the community were able to identify which of the resources they use, which are important to them, and really importantly, how they share them between livestock keepers and agriculturalists. And the incredible thing was as this participatory land use plan came into being over a very big area, we're talking here 200,000 hectares, a number of villages connected. As it came into being in the first year after it was adopted and agreed by the community and certified by the government, conflict went down 50%. And conflict going down is a good thing for food producers, because it means more just more space for sustainable food production in this system, which is mobility. What makes it sustainable is the mobility aspect. And it was the mobility which was causing conflict, and And we're hoping to take this to other areas as well. Where in pastoral systems in Central Asia and in South Asia and India, our members have been quite successful in starting to take some of the same approaches and apply them there. Back to you, Oliver. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mike, for sharing. Since you mentioned Tanzania, I wanted to ask Marta here from the Ministry of Environment of Tanzania, what are the challenges, Marta, that you are encountering in mobilizing and engaging with different stakeholders in the development of your NBSAP, but also when you were putting up the NEOAS strategy? And what did you do, or what steps did you do to make sure that you're improving the process and that you're making it as participatory and as inclusive as possible?
Yeah, thank you, Olive, for this question. In fact, when we were developing our NBSAP, almost every stakeholder has participated in the development of the targets, from academia, local government, local NGO, international NGO, the youth, the women, the ministries and the agencies. But the common challenge was lack of data and information on certain information, especially they can say that we have nowadays there is a disappearance of certain local seeds, or they may tell you that in our area we don't produce much because if we don't have money to buy the fertilizer, therefore we don't produce much. And when we ask, you don't produce much, by how much? They don't say, they don't have the data, they don't have the information. So because we had academia and research institutions, so those people from that institution, they managed to provide some of the data and information, but the majority of data and information we were missing. Therefore, in the NBSAP, we are planning to have we managed to develop one target of having the data and information on the biodiversity loss and the biodiversity loss and the means of those loss. What happened? It means if the biodiversity is lost, by what means? So we may have the data and information which will help us to develop strategy to overcome those challenges.
Thanks very much, Marta. Then very quickly to Bayush and to Isa. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of your experience, or what has been the most difficult experience you have had, and how you're able to address it in terms of, pushing a little bit the boundaries and pushing a little bit yourself and your organization and your stakeholder constituency in engaging with government processes in, let's say, in biodiversity conservation issues, or in developing NBSAPs, or other mechanisms or other clauses that are related to food systems. Isa or Bayu? I think we've lost Bayush, but Isa, yes.
Yeah, please, could you repeat the question?
Can you share with us an experience that you had in the past in terms of how you tried to push that youth, like youth looks like yourselves or YPARD, have been engaging in processes? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in YPARD Peru chapter, we promote the rural schools for young people. This means each year we promote this school to empower young rural people, because we try to solve different problems in the rural communities, peasant communities, and indigenous communities. And after this school, each group of these young people, present their solutions, working together with the community, with the leader of the community. And we have different challenges in Peru, because the politic about, for example, pesticide use is really bad. Institutions who need to do it, and is part of the government, is didn't this work, and many communities continue using a lot of pesticides and affecting their pollinators, biodiversity, you know. But with this Peru chapter, like a white part, we are trying to empower these young people in rural communities, you know, with our ecological focus. And yeah, and there are in South America, in south of Peru, there are different initiatives basically, but to empower indigenous communities. So in our case, we try to be most integral, you know, working with young people with the majority of regions in our country. I think it's really important to empower these young people and women too, because they are the guardians of our agrobiodiversity. In this year, we recently won a financial fund. It's a small quantity, but this financial fund will allow us to work in the first project that in the land with a rural school, specifically because we are trying to connect the child with the, you know, with all the biodiversity that they have in these mountain ecosystems. So because they will be the guardian of this biodiversity if they know this, what kind of species they have in the mountains, you know, and how the pollinators, for example, are connected with the food production. So with White Peru chapter, we have a big challenge, but we are trying to work with our own resources, you know, and sometimes applying for financial fund to do it possible. But yeah, in our case, rural schools is free. We don't have a fee for rural youngs, you know. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Isa. Now I'm looking at, we go to the next part, which is right around Q&A part. We have 2-3 questions in the chat, and we could turn it over to any of the speakers who would want to do that. But maybe before we go to the Q&A, maybe we'll just do first maybe a quick reaction then from our discussants. So first probably with Mr. Kwame Kuponzo, Executive Director of the Center for Environmental Justice in Togo. And then we call on Krishna Sutta from Race Consortium. Kwame, what are your thoughts? What are your reflections hearing what you have heard?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's very, very important to point that before talking of agroecology, I think Michael has mentioned it, we need land. If there's no land, then we can't say agroecology practices, okay? Because we need to show the practice, we need to show the results to say that yes, we are developing agroecology. So that's very key. And the second point I would like to highlight here is the local seed. Because what's going on actually, the small-scale farmers are facing the GMO challenges, like they are putting forward the GMO seeds, which are not sustainable. So farmers need to conserve their local seeds to develop agroecology practices. And the use of chemicals is also a challenge. I think we need to be very careful in saying that agroecology can use some pesticides. We need to be very careful on that, because here in Togo, there is so much confusion between agroecology and bioagriculture. So it's very important to continue sensitizing people on what is agroecology. So as Oliver mentioned in the introduction, I think it's very important to continue emphasizing that agroecology is a science, agroecology is a practice, and agroecology is a movement. Movement because it brings small-scale farmers from different sectors, for instance, fisher folks, crop growers, gardeners, and livestock, small-scale livestock people. They come together to reflect. So it's a movement, and it's very important to point those elements. And land tenure also is very key. If we want to have a long-term practices, agroecology practices, we need to secure the land. And without securing land, it's going to be difficult. In Africa as a whole, we have different let's say practices, because in Ethiopia, for instance, they said land belongs to the government and the people have right to use it. In Africa, land belongs to people, but if there is how do you call it, minerals or oil discovered in that land, then it causes displacements, it causes land grabbing, it causes biodiversity loss, because once the minerals are exploited, once the oil or gas exploited, it means danger for the biodiversity. So it's key to have the reflection, ongoing reflection on how to gather and to put into consideration the biodiversity conservation and the role that agroecology can play in the biodiversity conservation. That's very important. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kwame. Krista, any reflections? What are your thoughts on this topic, and based on what you have heard, and also in terms of based on what you have been doing in the RAISE Consortium?
Thank you very much. So I represent the RAISE project, which is a project it's called Rights-Based Agroecological Initiatives for Sustainability and Equity in Peasant Communities. So we in this program, we really promote agroecology and a human rights-based approach. And I heard now in the discussion many times this element of participation. I think that is one of the principles of the HLP report, but at the same time, how we combine that, we see that agroecology is mentioned explicitly in the human rights instruments of UNDROP, which is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. So when we look at this maybe human rights-based approach to agroecology, I see a lot of also good elements that we could strengthen even more and use the synergies of those instruments. When we look at the UNDROP, we see that there's an explicit mentioning of rights and duties with regard to agroecology. There is explicit mentioning to the right to seed and farmer-managed seed systems. There is explicit mentioning of the right to land. And from our RAISE consortium, there's an important reference to right to participation. And participation with regard to right holders being really engaged and involved in decision making when it comes to agricultural policies. And of course, they would promote the agroecology in that sense. But the right to participation is one of the key, and maybe one or two examples from our activities I would like to share. One, which is our partners in India and Nepal, they were working with youth groups. And on the one side, they developed an agroecology toolkit, which is kind of addressing youth language and perspective. So it's sensitizing youth on agroecology, but at the same time, they developed a Jagrik toolkit, which is a tool informing youth on rights and duties, on UN drop, but also on children's rights and related laws and policies in their context. So by doing this, the youth is also forming youth networks and then starting the conversation with local governments. A second example I would like to mention briefly is our partners in Southern Africa. It's the Rural Women Assembly. It's a member-based network, and they have developed the concept of the feminist agroecological school. So there we see that there's an exchange, co-creation of knowledge amongst peasant women, but at the same time, UN drop is being introduced, and again, the element of participation. So it kind of stimulates and empowers women to really formulate their own demands and bring forward policy recommendations. And for example, they have also developed their own seed audits. They know what kind of indigenous seeds they have within their groups. So it gives them kind of strength if we think of agroecology combined with UN drop. And that's for me an interesting learning also from the discussion today, that this is really also an aim of the discussion, to have a fair governance. What is fair? It means people can participate, people who are mostly affected by those instruments. And also coming back from Rome just now, where the UN Committee on World Food Security has met and ended the session yesterday, it was also related to the right to food. And that is also so important, that we try to get, how can we try to combine the different human rights instruments and really refer to agroecology as we speak. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Krista. I mean, it would be great if you could also share with us any documents or links to the website of your various initiatives, and we'll make sure that we share it not only to those in the panel, but also to the participants who are listening and joining us today. We have a few questions in the panel, in the Q&A box, and we have a couple of minutes more to respond to some of those. So maybe whoever wants to pick that up, maybe Lynn, how can we design agricultural systems that are both productive and climate resilient? And the second question is, what are the ethical implications of using GMOs in agroecological systems? There's a third question there on the box as well about how can we create a global movement for regenerative, and I would say agroecological systems that prioritize soil health, biodiversity, and climate change. So anybody of our speakers, we have few minutes to respond to this.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll jump in, Oliver, if that's okay.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I tried very quickly answer question 1 and 2. I think what we've been talking about today in terms of agroecology is really about the redesign of agricultural systems. I mean, there's a typology of 5 levels of agroecology, for example, and we know that we can start with input substitution, but that doesn't actually change the system. But when we actually redesign a system according to agroecological principles, the evidence shows that it is both productive and climate resilient. Of course, we know at the same time that we do have to address the root causes of climate change, because any agricultural system eventually may not be able to withstand some of the devastations that we are seeing increasingly around the world. But we do believe that putting in place the agroecological principles, redesigning agriculture according to those principles can really help communities at the level that they're at the local level to be much more productive and climate resilient. Now, on the second question on the implications of using genetically modified organisms or GMOs, I think I have to say, in the first place, GMOs are not compatible with agroecological principles because they actually extend the industrial model of agriculture. They're currently largely used in uniform and monoculture systems in North and South America largely. They are corporate controlled and have risks to biodiversity, soil health, and human health. Importantly, with potential socioeconomic impacts on peasants and other small-scale food producers. Now, a system like GMOs, which is part of that industrial model, actually removes decision-making power from communities. One is because of the links to the technological package. Most GM crops are linked to chemical inputs, for example, herbicide-tolerant plants. And also, as mentioned by the previous speaker, because of the intellectual property rights systems, most of the GM seeds are either patented or under plant variety protection, which actually marginalizes farmers manage seed systems and local seeds. So communities do not then have the decision-making power, do not have the choice of what seeds to use. So I think these are very important. And in fact, when we look at the CBD 30 years ago, it already raised the issue of genetically modified organisms and the need for a protocol, and that birthed the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety, which is actually the only international law governing and regulating the risks of GMOs. And this is put in place at the national level with national biosafety law. So I think internationally there is a recognition that GMOs are different, that they need regulation, and I would add that they are actually not compatible with agroecological principles. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Lynn, for elaborating on the first two questions. Anybody of our speakers who would want to pitch in as well? Anyone from Mike or Isa or Bayush? There's another question there on the Q&A. What response agroecology movements can organize to face lobbying transnational industries producing chemical fertilizers and other chemical insurance? So I think Lin Ching has alluded to that in her question as well about how compatible, right, those things are. But yeah, feel free for other speakers who would want to jump in. Mike?
It's Mike here. Thanks, Oliver. I'll jump in on that one. It's not something we work on, that particular question, but we do very much work on the question of competition for land between very large corporations and local people. And all I can say is it's very much about power. We start with a very unequal basis of access to power, and so the challenge is how do we make alliances? How do organizations together? That together can be powerful, even if alone they may not have a very strong voice. And so I think we need to be doing very much what your coalition is doing, Oliver, of developing wide alliances with research organizations, with farmers organizations, with women's organizations, with international organizations. And even if on many issues these organizations may not say exactly the same thing, where we can agree, in your case, on the importance of agroecology, we can make progress. We can shift the paradigm, the system, the thinking of what should be normal and what should be allowed and what should not. And I believe we can make progress that way.
Thanks very much, Mike, for contribution. Anybody else from the group? Right. What I wanted to add into the conversation is that current food systems are not sustainable. Right. It is. But we often hear it's broken. But maybe another word that we could use is actually worn out and tired. Initially, we're asking food for our food systems, produce food. Now we're asking for it to come up with more nutritious food. But we are also asking for our current food systems to produce multiple benefits, right? Biodiversity friendly, climate, etc. So it's really worn out because we're asking too much. But as a result of that, and because as a result of our current system, the current food system is producing 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. They're responsible for 80% of biodiversity loss, and they're using 70% of freshwater resources. But they're also not addressing the triple burden of malnutrition and maintaining social inequity and the loss of social value. And there are several lock-ins that prevent change from happening. This is essentially from a very export-orientated approach to agriculture, the emphasis on the production rather than sustainability, the wrong concept of a cheap food, of producing cheap food, that is one. But central to this, and has been underscored several times, is this concentration of power, right? And this is precisely the reason why in the context of our conversation today and in this biodiversity law and governance day, it's important to make sure that it is not just about law and governance per se, but it's really around governing and lawmaking, which is in a way that is inclusive as
thank you, sorry.
possible, right? And we have several mechanisms in different countries there. Let's say the local government codes that provides the framework for devolved function and devolution, where citizens, in many cases, where citizen participation is highly encouraged. There are those mechanisms that can be used and adopted and take advantage of. And I think it's really key and incumbent upon us to really assert the rights of the people for organization, for citizen participation and whatnot, particularly of stakeholder groups, young people, women's groups, indigenous peoples, and the like. Right. So any other questions or comments or reflections from